Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to American Heritage School. Thank you for being with us tonight for our third and final installment in our Heart and Mind Parenting Lecture Series. We welcome those of you who are guests to the school, guests of friends that have brought you along. My name is Chase Hale. I'm the principal of our American Fork campus. We also have a worldwide campus that covers all 50 states and about 60 countries with distance education curriculum, as well as a forthcoming Salt Lake City brick and mortar campus that will be opening a K-8 program this coming August. We have both the audience that's physically present tonight, but we also want to welcome our remote audience that is streaming live right now. I want to just say thank you to a couple of folks who have helped pull tonight off. Obviously, we're grateful for our speaker who will be introduced to us in a moment. But additionally, I want to just recognize Kimberly Heath and our parent service organization as well, who have worked together, Kimberly as well as that group, to really plan and execute this event tonight. They're also the ones that you can thank for the refreshments that will be served afterwards. And then, of course, Dan Morgan and our team of audiovisual technicians who are making all of this look really good right now. We will have a question and answer period following the end of our lecture this evening. I'm going to ask that if you have a question, you make your way over to this microphone on my right side and just line up there with your questions. It's important that questions be asked through that microphone because the audio setup in this room right now is configured such that the only sound that is being captured by our live stream is coming through either this microphone or that microphone. So please ask questions through that microphone. Before I go ahead and announce the remainder of our program, I just want to ask and answer maybe two questions. First, why do we have this lecture series? And second, why did we pick this topic tonight? American Heritage School assists parents. That's our first and foremost assertion that we make in our mission statement. And we exist not to substitute or displace parents, but really to supplement them in ways that are helpful to them. In the case of this lecture series, that means going so far as to equip them and enable them with good ideas and good practices that can help them in some of the more personal and intimate areas of their home and family life. And that's probably as good of a segue as I could make into the second question, answering the second question, why tonight's topic? Lest anyone be concerned or have any rush judgments, let me just clarify that American Heritage School does not teach sex ed in the classroom. This is a topic that we have decided is of such great importance and such sensitivity that it is best done in the home, rather than picking a one-size-fits-all curriculum for a teacher to deliver to a class of 25 students. We feel that this topic is best done by parents in a one-on-one fashion and in a continuous ongoing manner in ways that are directed by the parent's best judgment and knowledge of what's needed by that child. And so the purpose of tonight's topic is to really equip and enable parents in a very sensitive and important subject so they can be very successful. And we're very grateful for Dr. Janet Erickson, our guest speaker, who's going to lead us through that. Our opening prayer will be offered by an alumnus of our school, Christopher Homestead, after which we will have our speaker introduced by her sister and our assistant principal over our high school here on this campus, Elizabeth Acuna. We will then hear from Dr. Janet Erickson, and then following the Q&A portion that comes after her remarks, we will have a closing prayer by Deanna Rowan, who is a mother and a member of our staff here at the school. She's a financial analyst with our American Heritage Worldwide campus. And then, of course, once the closing prayer is over, we invite you to remain, to linger longer, to get to know each other better, to enjoy your date night, and to enjoy some refreshments, and just stay as long as you would like. Christopher.
Our Father in heaven, we are grateful to be gathered here this evening and to be able to share in this time and opportunity together. We're grateful for opportunities to learn from thy Spirit and to be able to learn from those around us. We ask for thy Spirit to be here with us this evening, that those with questions or concerns will be able to be guided and directed by thee in how to best approach and utilize the information presented tonight. We are grateful for this school, its mission, and the purpose that it is set out to accomplish. And we pray for the families and students and individuals who are in both close proximity here with us this evening and across the world, in being able to be instruments in the hands of the Lord in the way that thou would have them serve. We're grateful for those who have made this evening possible and pray that we can utilize this time to the best of our ability. And we say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Janet Erickson is an associate professor in religious education at Brigham Young University, where she teaches the Eternal Family course, as well as the Introduction to Family Process course. She received a PhD in Family Social Science from the University of Minnesota and a bachelor's and master's degree from Brigham Young University. She is a research fellow of both the Wheatley Institution and the Institute for Family Studies, and has been a columnist on family issues for the Deseret News since 2013. She and her husband, Michael, have been blessed with 2 children, LaDawn, age 11, and Peter, age 8, who both attend American Heritage School. Jenna is an alumna of American Heritage School and serves on the Board of Trustees. And now a few things from her older sister. I'm 2 years older than Janet, and have been so blessed to be her sister. When she was growing up, she was a force for truth and goodness. And I remember hearing stories. She weighed about 65 pounds, I think. And when she was in high school, if the boys weren't asking the girls out on date dances, she would go up to even the big football players, and apparently they were scared to find her, and tell them to get with it, and start asking girls out. She's also a force for goodness. A few months ago, when my daughter was diagnosed with cancer, she was the person who reached out to me and said, "What can I do?" And she took over organizing meals to come into our home for a number of months. And lastly, she's a person of great humility. When she was probably in her early 20s, she was Miss Orem. And we didn't have a lot of great vehicles to drive in our home. And the vehicle that we drove was a truck that was probably 15 to 20 years old and actually had holes in the floorboard. That's how falling apart it was. So she would put on her Miss Orem crown and her gown and go showing up to these things to represent the city of Orem in our falling apart truck. And climb out of it with all the holes and just go present herself. And I did not realize that she had been hired at the religious education department at BYU until a few months ago, when I heard from another sister that she was on a podcast. And I went to listen to the podcast, and they introduced her as having that job. She and I talk every few days. She never bothered to tell me. When I tease her about it, she said, "Well, you know what's most important to me." So I'm excited to let her address you. She is a person that the more you know her, the better you realize she is. She is good all the way through. And it's a privilege to be her sister. She's always been such an example, and a privilege to hear from her tonight.
I'm grateful for prayers and help as we talk about something very deeply significant. It's my hope tonight to help pull the gift of sexuality out of the darkness and into the light, where together we can better understand this gift and how it is intended for goodness, learn how to talk about it, learn how to help our children understand it for themselves, and learn how to help them turn it to good in their lives. I realize in doing this that there could be a feeling among many of us that we didn't do this earlier, that we didn't do it better. I tease my parents. I have cousins that their parents would slip a little book under the door that was like, I think it was called You Are a Dot. And that was their sex education from home. In my case, I didn't get even a book. I'm reading along in the AP biology book as probably a junior in high school. And we were studying reproduction. And I'm reading along and I'm thinking, they are lying. They are lying. This cannot be true. There's no way, right? In absolute horror. And just to tell you that we have had to come a long way as a culture in how we approach this. And I would say it is inspired. It's revelatory in what has happened to push us to both understand sexuality better and to talk about it more and in clearer and truer ways, because no one on this earth has more truth than we do, more powerful truth about what sexuality is, what our embodiment means than we do. And this is the time. Many would say we're behind the time, but maybe it takes us being pushed in order for revelation to come and more clarity to come, and we are part of that effort. I cannot think of a better place to find support in that perspective and that effort than right here at American Heritage School, where we can do things differently than anywhere else. And so that is my hope tonight. Our goal is to enable ourselves and our children to develop the ability, and I'm going to use this word that's very powerfully talked about by Jennifer Finlayson-Fife. I'll be drawing on wonderful experts, not my own scholarship. But our goal is to help them integrate the God-given gift of their sexuality into their lives in a healthy way by strengthening their understanding of it and empowering them to make wise choices with it, not just telling them, don't look at it. We want them to know what this gift is, to understand and experience a sense of stewardship over it that leads not to compliance, not defiance, not compulsivity, addiction, and not repression. And that requires talking about it. Because when we don't talk about it, or when we do, and it is filled with anxiety, which I'm not going to be critical of anybody, because that's how we all feel to some degree, most of us. But the fear around it, the lack of talking about it, just gives it more negative power, rather than the strength it is intended to be. And so our children internalize the message that sexuality and sexual feelings are bad, that they are bad, driving this fear-based focus on it. Meaning and what that does is it takes them out of the driver's seat in the use of this gift, making them afraid, rather than able to understand it and relate to it. And we don't need to be afraid of it. That's the wonderful news. There's nothing that we need to be afraid of. We'll talk through why we might feel fear, but given the truths that we have, the doctrine that we have, we do not need to feel fear. That first most core truth, and I'm just going to start by listing, these slides are not, they're not fun slides. What they will do is they will give a list of principles in each of a set of areas. And the first area that of course we start with is the doctrinal foundation for understanding sexuality. Knowing that the most important, the most effective remedy or the most effective bulwark against distortion around sexuality is a true understanding of it. And so we teach the truths that absolutely are the greatest gift we have. And the first truth is that we are daughters and sons of embodied heavenly parents. They have bodies. And we are created in their image and likeness as male and female, with a body that is as sacred as the spirit. Unlike all other Christians, We know that the body is not an impediment to our growth and development. It is absolutely essential to it. And if there's one thing that our world struggles with, it is, and I'm sure it's an adversarial approach, it's from the adversary, it is to disregard the body, to separate us from our body. And so we see gender having gone from a biological understanding of gender to a social understanding of gender, and now to a psychological understanding of gender, such that whatever I am in my mind, whatever I think I am in my mind, is what I am. And the body is disregarded. God wants us to reclaim the gift of this body in the image of heavenly parents, with all that that means, defining that our gender is rooted in biology, because the soul is composed of the spirit and the body. Our bodies matter. They are fundamental to us becoming godly. The second truth is that our bodies, the gift of the stewardship of our bodies, was bought with the price of the Savior's blood. He honors that gift, even giving his life for the gift of our sexuality and ordaining it for our blessing. But of course, that recognizes that sexual expression, and this is the third truth, sexual expression is not an end in itself. It is a means to a higher end. What is that higher end? It is to experience oneness, man and woman, body and spirit, heart, mind, and being, who are given to one another, even as their divine individuality is honored. Its expression, its purpose is to have that beautiful experience. When, as Elder Bednar calls, the eternal complementarity between the natures of male and female spirits, which complete and perfect one another, each contributing differently but equally to a oneness that can be achieved in no other way. And our sexual experience, sexual intercourse, is itself an expression of that divine complementarity. That intimate giving and receiving of one's body and one's soul is captured in the Old Testament use of the word to know in reference to sexual expression, where one rabbi says the word in Hebrew is da'at, meaning to know in the most profound way that a person can know another at the level of the soul, revealing oneself completely. Now, I know all sexual experience, even marital intimacy, doesn't always lend itself to that. People can engage sexually and not experience deepened intimacy, but its purpose is to deepen that fullest experience of connection and oneness. Elder Holland adds, that does not end there. The purposes of sexuality do not end there. That sexual union is also, in a most profound way, a sacrament of the highest order. A union not only of man and woman, but very much the union of that man and woman with God, enabling the divine privilege, the miraculous and majestic power of transmitting life, the unspeakable, unfathomable, unbroken power of creation. In our conversation recently with our daughter, LaDon, and she would be horrified if she heard that I'd said anything about that, but it was so beautiful how Mike was talking to her about sexuality, and it immediately went to a conversation about how she was conceived. And we were both older, 34 years old, hoping for children, and LaDon came. And it was so beautiful to just describe the joy of being able to have her come to earth and talk about that directly as we were talking about what sexual activity, what this intercourse experience, what sexual expression enables through God. And that's what he's talking about. Now the next one, Elder Holland clarifies so powerfully. Many of you are familiar with soul symbol sacraments. I just start with it because I think we have to start with the doctrine that means everything to our understanding of sexuality. He says, you must wait. Given what this means, you must wait until you can give everything. And you cannot give everything until you are legally, and for Latter-day Saint purposes, pronounced as one. And then he says, toying with the God-given body of another toys with the soul of that individual and trivializes the atonement that saved that soul and guaranteed its existence. exploitation of the body is, in the last analysis, an exploitation of Him who is the light and the life of the world. Now that helps us understand why this is so serious. It also helps us understand why sexual abuse is so developmentally disruptive, because our sexuality is core to our being. I've thought a lot about this. I've thought about it in the context of divorce when I talk to students about the effects of divorce on a child, with the caveat that divorce can absolutely be the right thing in certain circumstances, but appreciating what it means in the life of that child. And what we now know is that children don't just identify with each parent, they identify with their union, with their oneness. And so we'll hear things like, if my parents were not meant to be, was I meant to be? Now that feeling comes because they identify with that union of their parents, of which they are the express embodiment of the union of those parents. And so this disruption of divorce means a disruption within their very core. And so when we think about what sexuality means, we are each walking around as beings who were brought into being by the union of two in an act of love, we hope, and the pain associated when it was not an act of love, but the deep meaning and that is core to us when it was an act of love that enabled our coming into being. I think that helps us understand why it is so deeply personal, why it is so disruptive when it is stripped from another, when it is, as he says, when it is trivialized. Now, what does this doctrine mean for teaching our children? And I think what it means is we get to talk about the body and rejoice in the body, that it is divine, it is core to our development, that we are in the image of heavenly parents. The second piece is that we are sensual beings, that we are created to be able to taste and feel and smell pleasure and to want it, to desire it, that pleasure is part of joy, that erotic givenness to the pleasure of our bodies in the experience of being loved and of loving another is good. Now, I could not have understood that as a 16-year-old. Our daughter cannot understand it as an 11-year-old. She doesn't understand erotic feelings yet, and erotic pleasure and the givenness that that means. But she will someday, and it is good, and it is designed for goodness. Now, I think recognizing that, natural feelings of shame, protectiveness, and secrecy, those are normal. Given how core and how, in a sense, vulnerable the reality of our sexual feelings are, of our sexuality is, then there will be natural feelings of protectiveness and shame and secrecy around it. It's how we will naturally feel. It's very personal. There can be embarrassment of it, and boys and girls at different ages handle that embarrassment differently. We feel protective of it, we feel fearful of it, because it is such a powerful way of experiencing being in relationship with others. So we are protective of it because it is so powerful, not because it is bad. And for them to understand that, those feelings of fear and secrecy and shame around it are not because it is bad, but because it is so powerful. Now that leads to this next one, which is, again, our purpose. Our purpose is to help them develop an integrated experience of their sexuality, sexual integration. That means accepting the embodiment, accepting the body and what it is in its kind of messiness and its mortality and its earthiness, accepting it and rejoicing in it and relating to it in a way that brings goodness into our lives. That sexual integrity means, so I'm going to use those two words, integration, where we accept, receive, understand, appreciate, value, have stewardship over. That integration is related to integrity, which is what we want them to develop. The ability to use that power in ways that are true to themselves, not to place it at the responsibility of someone else, but their own responsibility, their own choice to use it in that way, to use it in a way that is respectful of themselves and others. And the truth is, we create relational and moral strength through that deep sense of sexual integration, not in spite of it. Being integrated sexually is a strength, not a weakness. Okay, now this is not an easy thing. As youth move towards adulthood and their bodies become capable of reproduction, which means capacity for romance and attraction, it's a very complex process. It involves feelings of insecurity, uncertainty, conflicting feelings, including a mix of self-doubt. There's some sexual feelings, there's romantic feelings, they're not always tied together. There's exciting feelings, there's guilt, and it's normal, but it's very uncomfortable. And it requires help from us as parents to navigate that, to understand what is going on within them. At the same time, all of this is happening, they are likely to receive messages about how sexuality will harm them and how they'll be harmed through it. Fear about what they're wearing, that it will hurt them sexually. Fear that they'll induce feelings in other people. Fear that they'll not find a healthy path for themselves. Fear that they'll get trapped in pornography, all of which are legitimate fears. But what happens is all these fears mixed with all the uncertainty make it a very difficult experience. And it can make it very confusing and uncertain. So we have messages that it's super fearful, but it's awesome at the same time. And how do they reconcile that? Why would I want to do something that was so horrible, right, ever? And so just recognizing how complex this process is so important. This can be a critical period of learning and growth. And I love how Coach Smith, I just have in that third bullet there that people who talk about this will talk about the importance of keeping fear in a separate conversation. So we're talking about the divine gift of sexuality and sexual union as spouses in marital intimacy and all the joy that it's intended to be. And that's a separate conversation from protection from sexual abuse and pornography and the dangers around sexuality. We keep them in a separate place, and they experience what they can feel from us, the goodness of it, and that enables them to recognize the distortion more quickly and more easily. So this gift of sexuality, I love how Coach Smith will talk about this here at American Heritage, and it is fascinating as a sociologist to look at what has happened to men in their languishing. So I just add this little caveat as we're talking about sexuality, because what we've seen is this growing proportion of men who are working age, who are not getting jobs and who are not getting educated. And for probably 10 years, we've been trying to figure out what is going on with men. Why are they languishing? And research out of MIT, AEI, lots of organizations have looked at this. What is going on with men? Maybe 5 years ago, Mark Regnerus came out with the book Cheap Sex. And his premise was sex has become so cheap and so easily and so readily available to men that it is innervating them. It is removing the developmental processes that facilitate growth. And I think it's a very powerful concept because, as he would note, prior to certain periods of time when a woman was going to engage sexually with someone, she would say, "You need to be marriageable. I'm not going to engage sexually with you until you are marriageable," which meant you can provide and be a good husband to me because I engage sexually and I can bear life that will be very dependent on me, alter my life tremendously, and I need someone who can respond to that in helpful ways. And that changed. 1968, we had widespread contraception available, legalization of contraception, and 1973, we have abortion come in. It's right in sync with the sexual revolution, which had there were some significant and right reasons, in a sense, for trying to change the way sexuality was treated, but it went down the wrong direction. And what ended up happening is we have sex and marriage and children all pulled apart from each other. And so marriage is over here and sexual relationships are somewhere else and within marriage, and then you have children elsewhere, out of wedlock childbearing, going crazy. And in that pulling apart of these fundamental components to the well-being of society, we've seen destructive influences. So sex being pulled out of marriage has been very destructive of men, partly because it's not just core to us and important to us and our development because it leads to sexual activity, but because of what it does in facilitating development. Channeling that energy into development, especially for young boys, is a very powerful thing. It can motivate significant achievement and dedication and devotion when that energy is channeled in developmentally healthy ways. So this can be a very significant time for that kind of channeling to happen, even as they're acknowledging the reality of those sexual desires. And that requires strengthening the muscle to say no to something that feels good in the moment, but is not what I want to do now with this precious gift in myself. I love how Sharon Hazel talk about this, strengthening the muscle to say no to something that feels good in the moment. And that's what they're building the capacity to do in this long period before they will be married and have a sexual relationship with someone on a consistent basis. So the challenge during this whole developmental process is for them to be able to be at peace with their sexuality, which means understanding it and relating to it in a way that enables them to do what it is meant, use it for what it is meant to be, a source of joy and strength. And that means fear is not the driver. Respect for oneself and for others is the driver. That's a shift that we don't talk about it because it's so fearful and scary, but because you have the capacity to use this for great good and strength. Now that means drawing on something that I think recently people have been much more effective in understanding and talking about, and that's mindfulness. We hear mindfulness talked about as good for our mental health, but we're hearing it much more in the sexual realm, including among LGBTQ questions, resolution that way. What mindfulness means, it's approaching our mortal experience, this reality of a body, from a place of awareness, curiosity, being observant about it, using discipline around it. But it's not a fear place. It's a place of curiosity, of wanting to understand, oh, look at what my body does. Look at how I feel. Look at what I'm experiencing. And developing a self-awareness about our embodiment. Okay, that's going to lead me to a list of slides that I wanted to share with you from Shalom Levitt, who's written on this. She and other colleagues at BYU wrote A Better Way to Talk About Sex. I'll show you the book that was published by Deseret Book. But this first slide just looks at teaching children ages 0 to 3. And we can make these slides available to you. But the important thing to focus on here is that there's 3 different components to how we talk about sexuality. And one of them is obviously the sexual development part. And so in this place, she would talk about the importance of naming body parts. You've heard that from others. From the start, talking about accurate body parts, labeling them, and gaining confidence, children gaining confidence in knowing everything about their body, right? Then the second piece is the emotional development that's happening there, and the emotional experience of the body. And so parents facilitating a healthy emotional experience of that body. Look at how it moves and grows and the gift that is body, celebrating the body. And what it means, right? You are valuable not only because of your amazing body, but because of your beautiful mind and spirit, all of these woven together in making your beautiful soul. And then the physical development side is that part of pointing out things about how they're getting stronger and getting more skilled and more able, preparing for other changes in their body as they develop and grow. So it's sort of a celebration of the body and celebration of development, and not being afraid of all the parts of the body, not being afraid to talk about and acknowledge all those parts, including those sexual parts of our body. Then this is 3 to 7. And what you notice is children are going to be asking more questions possibly, and being accurate and being simple in the way we talk about those. This is where that idea of boundaries comes, that your body is your own. And we keep genitals private because this is a healthy boundary. We don't talk to others about genitals or sex because that's an important boundary around your body, your soul. In the emotional development side, it's reminding your child that their thoughts and feelings are important. Now, as soon as I get to these slides, I just have to say, as she was presenting, I was thinking, boy, I have a lot of work to do on the relationships that I have with my children, such that these would be supernatural kinds of conversations and working on that emotional connection. And so what I want to tell you is, I've thought a lot about this. We have the real and we have the ideal. We learn about those in the gospel of Jesus Christ all the time. We're confronted with the ideal. And we know what the real is. And we're always trying to get out of the real. Like, there's got to be, right? We got to get to the ideal and get out of the real. But we live in the gap. That's what mortality is. It's in the gap between the real and the ideal. It's in that space. And every single day we live in the gap. There isn't perfection. It doesn't exist. There isn't a perfect way to teach about sexuality. There is not a perfect way to parent. It's really what happens in the gap is we are brought into the experience of intimacy. In our fallibility, in our weakness, we are brought to Christ. It's not something we can change alone about ourselves. And it's in that place that we learn and develop that connection with Him. It's also where we learn to be connected to spouses, to others, and to our children. And that happens through a lot of brokenness and fallibility. It happens through weakness. So I think when I present this kind of stuff, you just know there's no ideal, there's no perfect way. We're going to botch it all the time. We're going to mess it up. We're going to say things in a way we want to change, we wish we'd done differently. That is life. It was meant to be that way. It's supposed to be that way. Because what that does is engender the possibility of intimacy and connection with each other and with God. Perfectionism is a barrier to intimacy inherently. And so just knowing that this you could write down and try to practice the phrases and the list. This is a matter of the heart and connecting with those children around this critical part of our mortal experience. And so it's connecting with them emotionally and their feelings and doing our best to do that, which is very hard for someone like me. But I think working towards that, this connection with them and their feelings. And then that next part is the physical development. Children are not going to be experiencing sexual feelings at this point, but they're trying to figure out how their body works. And they'll be touching it. They'll be experimenting with it. They'll be acknowledging that there's certain feelings that come when they touch certain parts of their body. And we get to make a decision there. Are we fearful and shaming them about this because we're afraid? Which, what happens all the time in sexuality with our children is, and this is how parenting is in general, but what comes out in our reactions is about us, not about them. And so our fears and our responses to them have everything to do with our fears about ourselves and our own fears around sexuality. And so that whole idea of, I'm going to work on myself and my own integration, healthy integration of sexuality within myself, understanding it for myself, and then I can talk to them in ways that reflect that healthy integration with myself. So curiosity isn't fearful for us. We understand why it's happening. We understand we don't need to be afraid of sexuality. It's a God-given gift. And curiosity will motivate questions and exploration. And this is positive. This is where we can encourage positive feelings about the body, the gift that this body is, and that we respect and care for it. Now, when we get to the next one, and hopefully did I skip 9 to 12? Here's this greater understanding, gaining a sense of mastery. This is like when they're learning about feelings, and they might experience sexual feelings, and they're having to learn how to respond to those, how to understand them, and even master them in a sense. And so she has this wonderful statement: just like it is hard to master soccer or the piano, understanding our bodies and our sexual development, feelings, and the process of arousal takes time. And that you can reassure them you are the one who wants to help them understand this remarkable, remarkable process within them. It's complex, but it's also wonderful and joyful. And I think we think, right? We think, oh, you just turn sexuality on when you get married. Girls can grow up especially with that. And he's going to turn it on for me in this marriage. But that's just nuts, right? Because sexuality is part of our bodies, women and men, girls and boys. It is inherent to us. We are sexual beings, which is an absolutely beautiful thing because it means we came from two people in an act of love, a combination of them. And so we are walking around as sexual beings. And that is good, a joyful part of being. Now in this part, the emotional development part, children are becoming more emotionally independent. They're developing more anxiety about how they're going to talk to you probably. And this is where that independence doesn't need to be fearful. You remain a coach and discussing as you can and when you have their attention and when they feel safe to address things with you. And emotional maturity is the same. That also takes time and patience. So just as the body is developing and becoming mature, that emotional maturity is also a process of development. And so we are really patient with it and compassionate with it. Patient with this process, compassionate with it. This is when noticeable physical changes are going to happen. And talking about it helps them feel much more comfortable about the weird things that they are experiencing in their body. What is going on? This is where she says, this is when we can be aware of the signs of negative body image and address these. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the modesty part. But they're going to have during this period, times when they are more interested in the body, in figuring it out, and other times when they're less interested. Now the important part with the teaching teens section is Shalom would say weekly conversations with them about sexuality. Bringing it up with them. And they're not going to be bringing it up with you. But you're bringing it up with them. And you're talking about it. And even if they're not responding, you're saying, this is a really important part in your life. This is a really important time when you're navigating a lot. I know that. I know you're experiencing a lot of feelings. I just want you to know I am here. I know some of what's going on inside of you. I lived it myself. Those kind of approaches. And so this includes discussions about arousal. And this can be really important. Addressing, you're going to feel these feelings in your body and they might feel like this. And discussing it, talking to them about it. If you are aroused, then the question, do you need to act on the arousal or can it be controlled? Talking about what prompts it, what causes that to happen. Do both boys and girls feel that? What are the signs of it? And the horribly hard thing about this is a super important part of their development, and they're going through a lot. And it's a time when they're the absolute worst at talking to you, right? And so they're making this progress in identifying and expressing and understanding their emotions is more hard than it's ever been, difficult during this period. And so I think this is when we're like, there's no perfect way. We are groping through the dark most of the time. And we are doing what we can to connect, but we're approaching it from principles that we know are true. That's what we're doing. Now, there's the part about all of these physical changes still occurring and talking openly about those changes and normalizing their experience. And then this powerful part, although our bodies are sexually mature, emotionally, you are not yet mature. Your brain is not finished developing. And so you're not ready to give yourself fully to another person, as Elder Holland talks about it. You're not ready to make the commitments that are needed for sexual wholeness. But that doesn't mean these feelings are bad or this process is bad. It's this beautiful time of channeling that into your growth and development, into becoming someone wonderfully marriageable. Okay, so here's her book is A Better Way to Teach Kids About Sex. And these are wonderful, wonderful scholars who write about this, published by Deseret Book. It's very comprehensive. It's not a quick read. It's very comprehensive. Now, I love this, as we talked about those slides, I love this statement. This is someone who works with Shalom. Sexuality doesn't have to be scary, and they don't need to run from it. Invite them to breathe deep and acknowledge the sensations they feel. Reaffirm that these feelings are God-given. Do they know what triggered the feelings? Was it spontaneous? What do you want to do because of them? And so this period of non-judgmental awareness and acceptance can enhance their ability to act more intentionally instead of reactively to what they feel. That beautiful teaching of Shiblon, of Alma to Shiblon, that this is how God teaches us about love, bridling these passions that are beautiful and good, channeling them within these beautiful bounds enables us to love better. And that's what we all hunger for. Now, this next part is about developing integrity around this. And I think that starts with, so we've talked to them about their body and what's happening with their body, and now we're working on using this for good. It's integrated in you, and developing that integration, and also with it, integrity around the use of it. And I think that begins by saying, you know what, sexuality isn't inherently, I've talked about it as being good. It can also be used in terrible ways. And so sexuality is not inherently good or inherently bad. It is fundamental to being a human being. What we do with it, how we relate to it, will determine whether it is strengthening or destructive. And we will, all of us, will taste the bitter to know the good, to prize the good. We will have experiences where we say, that was not comfortable to me. I didn't like that. I didn't like how I felt there. Those are important. We aren't bad for having those experiences. They teach us a great deal about what we want in terms of how we relate to it. And what we're doing in this space is we're trying to help children move from beyond conformity and compliance to taking responsibility for their sexuality. So I'll teach students at BYU, and it's really interesting as we talk about for the strength of youth and other things. And one of their questions always in the class, you'll have students ask, is it okay to do this? Is it okay to do that? And immediately I can hear what's happening is they are placing the responsibility for their sexuality and the Spirit guiding them in that on somebody else, on their bishop, on for the strength of youth, on somebody else. And so I tell them, get out of that space. All of those guidelines were absolutely fundamental to your growth and development. They are critical. We need those guidelines. It's very important that American Heritage uses that honor code effort to guide, because it teaches us what we're learning by our experience and feelings, why we're having those feelings, why we're having that experience, why this feels good and why this doesn't to my soul. But those guidelines aren't ever going, right? We can't mature until we have said, I am owning this reality for myself, and I want to do it in a way that is true to me. And what we find out is they're actually more sensitive when they're doing it for themselves than when they're placing that responsibility on somebody else, on something else. They're more in tune with how I feel and what I'm doing. So I have countless girls one semester who said, I'm really uncomfortable with how I make out and kiss with my boyfriend. And I would say, have you ever said anything to him about that? How many of them do you think had ever said anything? 0. And yet they're feeling very uncomfortable. And when you think about those patterns coming into marriage, that's not going to go away. And here is this opportunity to develop integrity with yourself and integrity in that relationship. Identifying how I feel, thinking about how I feel. Why do I feel uncomfortable? Talking about it. And so we're trying to help that development. Liz and I will talk about how it's like driving a stick shift, right? Because every single child is different. And you letting up on the gas and putting down on letting up on the clutch and putting your foot on that gas pedal is an incredibly nuanced, sensitive process. And that's how children are. Each of them unique. I think Liz's son is at an age where he said, Mom, I would like those controls removed because I want to learn how to do this on my own. And that might not be the right age for somebody else. But it's trying to help them develop. This is yours. This is yours to bring goodness into your life. God has given you the light to know when it is being used for good or ill in your life. That means they have to develop self-awareness around it. And when we develop self-awareness about what's happening within ourselves, we increase agency rather than just being controlled by impulses and habits. So it's getting us to think, and our children to think about, what are you feeling? What are you feeling? What are you thinking about? What do you feel? What do you think? Now, this next one is any kind of sensual pleasure can interfere with joy. And just talking about that, there's beautiful sensual pleasure that's intended from this gift, and any sensual pleasure can interfere with joy. We all know that. Food, whatever it is, wealth, whatever, right? And so we know that only seeking pleasure is destructive, but denying all pleasure is also destructive. It's not our body that is the problem. It is not sexuality that is the problem. It is how we are relating to it. And we have the power to relate to it in ways that are good, that will bring its goodness into our lives. Jennifer Finlayson Fife will say this: the happiest, most moral people do not have an absence of negative impulse, but they are able to not get hooked into those and not let them run the show. They can breathe through them, think through them, and choose deliberately. So life is not about getting an absence of negative impulse. It's about how we let those impulses govern us. I think along those lines, recognizing that lust, because you can have people really struggle with what is lust. I don't want to be lusting, and I also feel sexual feelings, and sometimes I feel aroused when I see certain images. Am I lusting? And I think clarifying what lust is it's not sexual feelings inherently. It is self-serving sexual desire. It is always wrong to exploit or use another person for personal pleasure by reducing them to something other than a child of God. And we are all working on, we can do that in many ways. I can do that to my children. I can turn them into objects quite quickly. And we do that as human beings with others. It's that same process when we're engaging with our bodies sexually. And so purity of heart is learning how to relate to others in a way that is pure. And that's what we're strengthening in these adolescents. That means, I remember hearing one time, someone who lived close here who had children in American Heritage, she said, it's been super hard to have like my daughter turn 16 because in our community, the whole idea is you send your children out, these adolescents out on a Friday night, and you give them a pack of gum and chapstick and tell them to have a good time. And I think they're, learning standards around chastity and things like that, but parents were just sort of, experimenting. I think maybe thinking that was healthy. And I think what we have to do is talk through, how are you using that other person? What are you doing in relationship with that other person? And the truth is, whenever you're misusing someone else, it will hurt you. It hurts you as well as them. And really being thoughtful about, why am I engaging in this behavior with this other person? What am I doing with them? Now, in talking about that, I think one of the things we have to tackle is the challenge of gender. And realizing that we've had some pretty challenging things around how we address women in regard to sexuality. And I think what's happening is, one of the challenges for women is we are predisposed to give our lives in service to others, to devote our lives in ways that are very critical to the development of children, but that are a setting aside, if you will, of our own desires in behalf of others. That's a beautiful thing. The problem is, along with that, is strong orientation, and radical feminism rightly reacted to this. We have denied the personhood of women, their own personhood, their own sexuality, their own desires and feelings and goals and aspirations. And so when we teach girls that they are managing men's sexuality because men can barely keep a lid on it and all the young men out there are really struggling, so you need to manage that by the way you dress and do things, we are depersonalizing, we are stripping them of their personhood, in a sense. And so there have been strong messages that sexuality is something that belongs to men, and it's not the church. This is the culture of which the church is part. This is the culture. Sexuality is something that belongs to men, not to women. Women accommodate or manage it for men who are barely handling it. And we see religious groups, right, who have a literal contempt for women and their sexuality. Cover it, hide it, keep it away, push it away, right? Manage it because she is so problematic because of her body. We talk to men about being actors. We talk to women about desirability, being desirable. It's how we kind of raise them. And so what happens is women push down their own sexuality, the divine gift of their own sexuality. And I love how Jennifer Finlayson Fife will say, men have more easy access, in a sense, to sexuality. They are more easily aroused, and they can access it more quickly. But women have greater sexual capacity. And if we thought of the way the body is constructed, and her body, its physiological makeup, women have greater sexual capacity. But we tend to push that down and hyper-attune women and our girls to managing the sexuality of the men around them. Now, that's why you get messages on a wedding day like, don't ever say no to him or he'll turn to porn. And she enters that marriage without the capacity, given that model of interacting, that does not allow her to develop desire because she is managing that husband, right? So it's a very poor way of thinking about things because it's a very poor way of relating to one another as objects, controlling one another out of our own desire for safety or validation. And neither is fully respective of the autonomy of the personhood of the other. And of course, what we want in marriage that's expressed in our sexual intimacy is that beautiful equal partnership, a beautiful coming together as a full person, each of us, to connect in a deeply intimate way. That gets messed up all the time because we as human beings are working on figuring that out. But that starts with messages to our girls about how they relate to men and how they relate to sexuality. And then there's just a reality, my male students are this way, there's a lot of anxiety, pain, and shame for men around sexuality. I remember a professor at the University of Virginia talking about how he was in a class and he writes work on the differences between men and women, and he just started talking about how men experience arousal and helping students understand that process. And the men just got lower and lower and lower and lower in their seats till they just felt like everyone's looking at me like I am absolutely disgusting. And if these girls know how I experience arousal, they're gonna think I am so disgusting. And so there's a lot of anxiety around sexuality for men as well as for women that we need to address better. Now, I think that has to do with how we talk about modesty. And I'm gonna go to the men's one first, recognizing this anxiety around sexuality. And the truth is, good men are going to notice feminine beauty. They are wired to do that. They are actually wired by the brain to respond to visual stimuli differently than women do, typically. The question, and I love how Jennifer Finlayson Fife will talk about, this is a very generous trait in male sexuality. The gazing upon a woman is a very generous way of engaging with her. It's a beautiful thing. But that gift means developing the capacity to manage that gift in healthy ways. And so the question is what to do with that potentially generous trait. So as we're working with our young men, the key is helping them become at peace with their sexuality, their ability to notice what's happening inside of them as they're noticing sexuality, and responding respectfully to it. Lust happens when we self-serve sexual desire, when we use another person for our own gratification. And so asking them, how are you using her? And to think about it, right? You aren't bad for being tempted that way. It's a very natural process, but you get to choose what you're going to do with that recognition of female beauty. And that means not using another person to gratify your own self. It also means not blaming her when she arouses feelings in you, when looking at her arouses feelings in you. And recognizing it is natural and right to feel physically attracted, but when we indulge those feelings, and young men will know, they will grow in their capacity to discern when they are doing that, when we dwell on or fantasize about them, our natural and appropriate feelings can lead to harm by objectifying the other person for our own gratification. I remember when, as teaching young women, we would sing that beautiful song, Guardian of Virtue. We are guardians of virtue. It's a beautiful song. It's a song for men. In their thoughts every day, they are masterful, can be masterful, champions, heroes in guarding virtue. And we are all around men who are remarkable in that beautiful way. What power, what masculinity. Now, that will take us back to talking about girls and modesty, recognizing that the core in teaching about modesty is not managing other people's sexual feelings. The core of it is respect for the gift of your own sexuality and respect for the sexuality of others. Not managing it, respect for it. It's a higher call. And that means modesty is moderation and appropriateness. It's what the word means. It's not shunning your body, covering your body, right? But it's also not flaunting your body. It's being at peace with your body, with that gift of feminine attractiveness and beauty. And so when we're thinking about how girls are dressing, the real issue is, what is your intention behind what you are wearing? Are you using what you are wearing? Are you using your body to extract attention or validation from others? Is that why you're doing that? And getting really, really in tune with why you're wearing what you're wearing. What is your intent behind it? What does it reveal to you about how you are relating to sexuality, your own gift of sexuality? Now, in a reaction to some of the ways we've talked about modesty, there's been a whole movement of girls saying, I'm going to take off everything because I'm not body shaming, right? It's totally irresponsible. It's not being responsible with the gift of your own body. And so proving you don't have body shame is not misusing your sexuality. It's using your sexuality in respectful ways that are responsible to yourself and to other people. And I think it's important to know, it doesn't mean that we don't have guidelines. We teach guidelines, we teach knee-length things. Some of us do that. Some of us, right, girls don't wear things that don't cover their shoulders, those kinds of things. People approach this in different ways. The important thing is, why the guidelines? What is the message behind it? And that respect for oneself and respect for others in that process. Now, the next slide is just going to talk about distortions. Oh, we'll go to pornography first. No, let's go to distortions first. Oh, did I skip it? One thing that's helpful to think about, here it is in our culture, there's going to be all kinds of distortions around sexuality. The first one that I've told you is this breaking apart of marriage and sex and children. And that fragmentation it's in every civilization, starting from the beginning. It has always been associated with the dysfunction, the destruction, the demise of that society. Those core pieces are bound together, and that's what leads to healthy children and healthy society. But other things are, right off the bat, you can tell children sexuality and the body is going to be used by others to get something. Because sex is so powerful, because it's such a powerful source of pleasure, others will use your sexuality to get something from you. And recognizing that. And so right away, there's images all over that communicate power and social prestige come from looking and acting sexy. Little girls get that message from the time they're about 4 years old. They can see there's something powerful about looking sexy. I can see it in all the images around me. That sex is a commodity to be bought and sold, that it's removed from intimacy. That sexual pleasure is an entitlement to be bragged about by boys. I'm standing there with Peter, he's 4 years old, we're playing, it's his first arcade. He'd been invited to a birthday party. He's on the motorcycle playing the game. And at the very end of the game, as he gets through the finish line, what do they show? An immodestly clad woman. To my 4-year-old. She was the prize. And we'll see messages like that all over the place. And so what Jason Carroll and Shalom Levitt will say, that's when you have the conversation, right there. What is that teaching you? What is that showing you about women and men and according to their age, being able to understand that? But what is this billboard saying? How does it make you feel when you see that billboard? What is it communicating about women and about men and about the gift of our sexuality? I think it's interesting recognizing that we are voyeurists. We see this as really problematic to be a voyeurist, but that's what movies do all the time. Take us into other people's bedrooms. And we are watching other people's bodies and sexual activity. And just thinking about, what are we doing? What are the boundaries around our own sexuality and the sexuality of other people? What is that teaching? Now, obviously, that means protecting them from exposure and figuring out what that means for each family. But I think the power is in saying, you will see all these messages. I remember the first time when I recognized, oh, these children can see the magazines in the grocery store. And I wanted to just like cover them up or turn them over and put them away. And rather than doing that, we don't have to be afraid of sexuality. That's the important piece here. We can look at it. It's a body. What are they doing with this body? Why are they doing that? How does it make you feel? What do you think it means? Rather than being afraid. And then it's empowering them instead of causing them to feel anxiety about, what is this? Why is mom standing there covering that up? What is that about? Right? And afraid of it. We don't have to be afraid of it. We can be offended, right? And bothered and disturbed, but that's different than fear. And saying, we have the power by the truths that we have, by the gift of agency in every one of us, to know what to do when we have this experience, seeing this. Now that leads us to pornography, which is can be a very complex thing. And I think more and more we're understanding that in terms of approaching pornography, we have to recognize that it is a source of pleasure and escape like many things. Food, video games, all kinds of things we could list. And so very often there can be a tremendous amount of shame around pornography when it's really being turned to as a way to manage anxiety, as a way to buffer. You'll hear that word, right? All of us engage in a buffering process when we face whatever it is. I don't want to write that paper. I don't want to do that task. Or we buffer. Oh, I'll go get a treat so it'll make it easier, whatever, right? And that's buffering. And really we're trying to help develop the capacity for courage and recognizing and being compassionate with the fact that we all want to escape from the anxieties of life. Mortality is hard. It is rough. We are very vulnerable in it. And so we all want to escape and find ways to get out of this uncomfortableness. But we grow through strength in recognizing what's going on inside of us. And so I think just appreciating facing reality will make you feel anxious. Our brains will push us to go to something we feel more certain of, masturbation and other things like that. And pornography can make a person feel like they're in control. They have power. It's a very distorted and false way, right? Because then it leads to shame and guilt that then feeds more of it, along with that, what's happening in the brain, seeking another high. But just recognizing this is why you're going to it. It's not that you're a horrible, horrible person. You're trying to manage mortality. And this has been an easily accessible way for you to escape. And let's talk about it, because you don't like it. You don't like doing this. It's not true to what you want. And so we're going to help you be able to figure out what's going on inside your body, why you're choosing this, and in your brain, to help you have power over it. So we'll talk about moving from shame to brain. That shame place is just not a place of power. I'm horrible, this is horrible, here I am again, here I am doing this again, why am I doing this again? All the shame around that, but pulling us out of that shame place into a brain place. Why am I doing this? What's going on inside of me? Why am I choosing this even though I don't want to? What's causing me to behave in a way that's so incongruent with living truthfully to myself? And I think forgiving ourselves for that process. I love this quote. Individuals can use pornography to distract themselves from unpleasant emotions and reduce their stress quickly. It can provide escape and euphoria to those who feel bored, overwhelmed, distressed by quickly accessing their sexual response. Self-medicating with pornography may lead individuals to come to rely on it for relief and to struggle to cope without it. Don't hesitate to engage your children in conversations about the complicated effects of pornography use. Your honesty about the short-term benefits, quote-unquote benefits, that they're experiencing will help your children believe in the long-term costs. As you earnestly seek to understand what compels your child to use pornography, consider the role pornography plays in helping them cope with the hardships of life. You can seek greater connection by brainstorming what needs they are trying to meet by using pornography. What alternative coping mechanisms are available to replace their pornography use? I just had this wonderful student, and he was so vulnerable and open after class last week, and he just said, I've struggled for years with pornography, and he said masturbation. And he's been dating someone, and so he was asking me some questions about how to approach that relationship as she has become fearful of that. And he said, I had a really good handle on it. He'd been doing therapy, and he'd worked with people, and Sarah Brewer, he'd been listening to Sarah Brewer's podcast, wonderful, I think very helpful, and had been an important source of help to him. But then he got into a difficult semester, and he was experiencing a lot of anxiety around it, and he didn't realize what was happening, but he kept slipping up every week. He was slipping up again. And it was horrible. Why am I? And he's dating someone, and he has to tell her, and he's just so horrified about himself. And then kind of pulling out of it with some good help, good therapy. What's going on? Why are you choosing this? What's happening? What is the experience that is causing you to want to turn to this? And he's developing all this strength and capacity and courage in understanding himself, why he goes to it, and how to respond differently. And it is so beautiful to watch that growth in a person. And so I think Sarah Brewer will be really, really powerful in talking about the role of shame and saying shame is never, we will think in the moment, if I hate myself enough, I'm going to stop doing this, right? If I hate it enough, I'll stop doing this. But as she says, shame is not a source of power in overcoming things. It is not going to sustain that effort. You cannot do the work, these are her words. For many people, shame is the root of their porn use. You cannot do the work to quit porn if you are stuck in shame. Shame is thinking something is inherently wrong with me. She describes putting a question out there on social media. And the question was, what does it say about you to use pornography? What do you think it says about you? What does this say about me? What does it mean about me? And these were some of the responses. I am a terrible husband. I am a terrible father. I'm not a good follower of Christ. It is as addictive as drugs, and I can't get over it. I can't progress spiritually until I quit this. I am disgusting. I am weak and lazy. I lack control. And for women, there was a comment, I am no longer worth it. And so she will work a lot on starting with ridding ourselves of the negative emotions around sexual urges. That impulses are a matter of physiology. They're inherent to our embodiment. And then starting that process of curiosity rather than judgment, pulling out of the fear, pulling out of the shame, pulling out of the anxiety, and looking at what's happening to me. Why am I doing this? What happens as I do this? Then she'll work on feelings. Stop fearing feelings. Stop running from pain. This is a world that breeds escape from pain. It's all about that. I think it's because so little of our day, Mom will talk about this, we're never cold, we're never hot, we're never hungry, we never feel discomfort. And so when we encounter discomfort, which is inherent to mortality, everything about us says, I gotta get out of this and escape from this. And so that's something we really have to work on in our culture of so much comfort, right? Is discomfort's important, and you can manage it. You can deal with this. So she'll talk about having that, what are you escaping from? What emotion are you buffering from? And that self-respect comes from not escaping. You are building self-respect by building courage in facing, understanding, and learning how to do this differently. So she'll talk a lot about urge flow and young people understanding what urges feel like, what happens in the body when you feel urges, what do you feel in your heart and in your lungs and in your mind and all of do your hands get sweaty? What are you feeling? And stopping and thinking about it. What does that urge feel like? And breathing through it, working through it. And you can't believe how powerful you can be in channeling these beautiful urges in places that you want them to be in better ways. Okay. I'll just end with one last thought. The whole purpose of our mortality is to develop the capacity for intimacy eternally. We live at a time when young adult happiness, the metric has just decreased, and it's lower than it's ever been, young adult happiness. And it's interesting that the key predictor of the predictors that they can identify is that our young people are actually having less sexual intimacy because marriage has decreased. They're not meeting people, they're not getting married, and they're actually engaging less sexually. And it's associated with decreased happiness. And so we have a culture, people will say it's the first time when you have a culture of cat people, which a cat person is a lonely human being who has either refused or is unable to achieve the risks and benefits of human intimacy. And so we are all about, as a church, covenants are relationship. They're all, from the beginning, covenants are about establishing relationships, enabling us to have healthy relationships, enabling us to be able to experience intimacy in beautiful, healthy, hopeful, joyful ways, and to have what our heavenly parents have, a level of connection that is, in Ty Mansfield's words, he experiences same-sex attraction. You might know Ty, but I love his powerful experience where he's grappling with this. Now he's married and has 5 children, but this super big challenge of trying to understand his same-sex attraction, his love for the Lord, his love for the gospel, and no way to live in this gospel, trying to figure that out. And he's in general conference. He'd fasted, searching for answers. He was developing a strong emotional tie with another man, and he's just struggling. And he said, the prayer was said, and immediately, for the next 2 hours, he felt an outpouring of divine love. And it just filled him for the whole 2 hours. And he says what was so remarkable about this is it was like he was given a vision of what married love, celestial love, looks like. And he said it made our best heterosexual relationships look paltry. Our most romantic notions look paltry. This glorious vision of love for one's spouse, love for others, a deep increase in what that means is what we are trying to do with our children. And that their understanding of their sexuality is to enable that process for them to really experience joyful intimacy. I believe that, I know it to be true, and we have the truth to be able to help our children do that. None of us will do it perfectly. I'm the least among us in knowing how to do this well, but I believe in the principles and that they can guide us and help us to do it better and reclaim this beautiful gift of sexuality that has been stolen from us and repackaged to be destructive. We reclaim it for the goodness that it's intended to be. And I leave that hope and testimony in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. I think we have just a few minutes for questions if you want to, or should I close, Liz? It's 8:15. Thank you. Do you have any burning questions that would be good to tackle for a minute? This is just the beginning of wonderful conversations and learning about this. That's the good news, right? Dan? When you role play, like, and specifically, would you be talking about sexual intimacy and what that's like? I think there's a lot of ways to go about that. I love every good book that I've seen about it always ties it to procreation. So that how have you ever wondered how a body comes into being, how a child is born, how it gets inside that mother? And this beautiful process of an egg and a seed coming together, sperm and egg, and that it's implanted in the body. So that's often a way that people will start, is this tying it directly to procreation. And then I think then once it's there and the beauty of it is captured in what it can be and what it's intended to do, as well as the connection that you feel as a couple, then there can be more appropriate times to talk about specific acts or specific feelings, right? Right, how a man might feel, how a woman might feel specifically in their body. So just progressing, I think, in the amount of detail that seems helpful to that child as they're experiencing it. But like Brad Wilcox's wonderful books, he taught thousands of people about sexuality, and it always ties it to procreation right at the beginning. And at first it starts with procreation and doesn't describe the sexual act of intercourse initially. But I think depending on the age of the child, you can tie that together, right? You could talk about a sperm and egg first, and then it ties to, and how does that happen? How does that get inside a woman's body? What does that look like? And talking more specifically about parts and all of that. I don't know if that, and I think recognizing children are going to be really different. To me, it was absolutely disgusting, like, right? And I think that's I love how Brad Wilcox says when he first heard it, he was like, the prophet was David O. McKay. He said, President McKay would never do that. He would never do that, right? This glorious man, right? And I think recognizing how children are going to experience it at different ages and their personality, and some are not going to say anything, like they're just going to be quiet listening, and others are going to have a lot of questions. This is kind of fun to engage in this, and that all of those responses are okay. I think it has to start at some place, right? Like how a body is created. And then what happens is once you've had that conversation, it's so much easier to talk about everything else. And so I think procreation, that act, whatever age seems right, people will say specific ages, and I'm always like, I feel like being in tune with that child is the most important thing, because you could stress them to no end by giving them way too much information, right? And then you could also be too slow in helping them. And so just trying to be in tune, knowing we're going to make mistakes in it. But then it feels like once you've had that conversation, then you can talk about it, all the facets of it, much more easily. Please.
Dr. Erickson.
These two are experts, by the way. I don't know why yes.
Dr. Erickson, thank you for your presentation. Earlier today, I took the opportunity to watch a James Bond movie. And I was reminded of the great role model that we're shown there, where there's this man who has sex with many women and feels such a lack of connection to them that the next day when they're dead, it's really okay. Now, it did bring up in my own mind a memory, which was this. When I was in medical school in Missouri, a classmate of mine would brag about the scores of women who he had slept with. And it's scary that this is a physician who may be taking care of you or your children now, but he would brag about this pretty openly. And he specifically said that the time that he lived in Utah Valley was his most fruitful in terms of racking up his score, because the young women in Utah Valley sex was so foreign to them that somebody knowledgeable was able to exploit them very quickly and very easily. So the questions that I have are, first of all, for my classmate, what kind of psychological damage does he have that as part of this pursuit? And do you think that there's truth in his assertion that it was way easy for him to have sex with more people in Utah Valley than elsewhere in the country?
I think knowledge is really powerful, Tom, Dr. Barlow, and teaching our young women right about their bodies and what their personhood and respect for their personhood and what sexuality feels like and what those boundaries are is really important. I don't know what exactly his experience was, but it saddens me, right, to think of girls being so vulnerable because of not knowing, not understanding. And for sure, the culture around masculinity is notches in your belt for how many sexual exploits you have. There's no question. There was a New York Times piece a year ago. She's done scores of interviews with young people, and this is the New York Times. It's not a conservative publication, right? And she was just saying, we have got to solve the problem of male sexuality. And specifically, what was interesting is she acknowledges most of their education is coming from pornography. That's where they're learning about sexuality. That's how they're relating to women. So you'll hear lots of accounts like that, right? Where the girl will say, I knew immediately that he had been looking at pornography by the way I'm being treated, right? But all she could offer, this author could offer in terms of moral, teaching them moral grounds for how they relate to other human beings, is to say, it's not as good. Guys, the sex is better when it's within marriage and it's respectful. It's better for you. It feels better. That's all she could offer, right, as a moral claim. And so we could put those arguments in front of people. We could say premarital sex is a predictor of divorce. It's associated with divorce when it's with a person that you do not marry. that the number of partners is a predictor of divorce, that what happens to the brain in going in and out of sexual intimacy with multiple people is it's as if it and I think we're seeing that in the culture, right? It inhibits the capacity to form long-lasting intimate relationships. It wires us in a different way. And so we could say that, right? But the moral claim is you are exploiting another human being. That's exactly what you're doing. But of course, sex has been taken out of intimacy, and so they don't see it that way, or they're told not to see it that way. Even though I know in their spirits, they feel that it is wrong, right? At some level. So, yeah, hard. And it's been so destructive to men. I think that's what we see. It's been so destructive to men's development. The plan is good. It's right. Well, thank you so much. Oh, please. Yeah, yeah. Yes, yes. Yeah. Yes. I'm just going to restate what you're saying so they can hear it. That we've got to figure out better ways of teaching boundary beyond just that 2 or 3-year-old, right? And because young women in particular may be trapped in something and they don't know what's happening. Now, I think that's exactly what's happening with my young women who are saying, he's kissing me in ways that are making me uncomfortable. But they have been taught, and we see this broadly in the culture with sexting, right? The research on sexting is so tragic because a young man will text a girl and ask her for a sext in response, and 99% of those girls don't want to send it. Why do they do it? They do it like that. They're afraid that they're going to be seen as prudes, right? They're not sexually mature. They're kind of, they're afraid of what it says about them to have a boundary around that, instead of knowing your boundary is good for that young man. It's good for everybody, right? And it is respectful of yourself to honor what you feel inside of yourself. But you are exactly right. Those messages are so powerful of girls just accommodating or responding or giving in, right? That they don't have a sense of respect for myself and valuing my own sexuality, my own boundary. Yes, communicates respect for yourself, right? Yes. What might you see that is not respectful of your boundaries or experience? I'm sorry, I do not mean to make young men sound terrible. I think it's a dynamic that happens, right? Yes, yes, yes. Wonderful. Okay. Yeah. Right. That's a really, really good question. And it's interesting that the church is not using the word masturbation now. The word is self-arousal. Oh, thank you, Uncle Richard. How do you bring up masturbation before it becomes an issue, right? And so you've got children that are 7, 8, 9, whatever, 10, 11, and you know that's going to be something they're going to experience as they have more feelings. And how do you bring it up? And I think without shame, which is such a wonderful question. And I think recognizing, even just saying, it feels good to touch parts of our body. We are made that way. It is supposed to feel good, right? And talking about what that goodness is intended to be for. It's to connect with another human being who you will love with all your heart. And so those good feelings are not designed for you to stimulate in you, right? But to experience with another person in a relationship. Now, you're going to wonder about your body, and you're going to, right? Boys are going to experience erection and try to, right, natural out of the blue sometimes, and try to understand what's going on. They will sense that something feels good. Girls as well. And you're going to You're going to maybe want to understand your body and those feelings, and be mindful of the feelings within you that will help you to know, is this wrong, right? What am I doing with myself? How am I using myself? So I think it's good. It's that framework of it is good. Your body is good. All those beautiful feelings are intended to meet the greatest desire of your heart, which is to be deeply connected with another person. So I've had that question myself. It's a really good question. All right. Well, I hope all of you have,
I'm really quiet, so I have to come to the microphone. I just had a question. Do you know of like a book that has just a good resource for like the biological, physiological changes? I never took a class on that. And so
yes.
I know what happened in my body,
yes.
but I don't necessarily know the boy aspect.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's like a book that you would recommend.
There are so many wonderful books, really. And there was a parent who came up after the all-parent meeting who said, we should make a list to share of the best books. Yeah, and what how they might approach it from a biological standpoint. They might approach it from a relational standpoint. They might approach it from a understanding pornography. And I think that's a wise idea. Like to share as parents, what are the best resources people have found on that?
Less question and more little 2 cents to add to the situation. Yeah. I grew up in an ag family, and I cannot overstate the value of taking kids to a farm. It's an easy way to start any conversation.
You are right.
Right now, we've got a pig, and we don't want to bore, and so we're ordering in stuff over the internet, and AI, artificial insemination, AI, and the whole thing, and the kids are elbow deep. So
in understanding the natural processes of
happen
a
on
reproduction.
A farm all the time, and it could not be more obvious. Like when your grandpa's like, "See the testicles on that bull," right?
Yeah.
It's just natural and part of an easy way to have that conversation.
I love it.
And there's lots of farms around here. Just take your kids to a farm,
hang
learn
out
all
with
sorts
them
of things,
and do farming, right?
Yes.
Now, how was I so ignorant growing up on a farm? I was still horrified, right? Thank you all so much. May you be blessed in this effort. And I am so glad to be part of a community that is working on this with me, right? And helping my children. And together we can do this. We can create a powerful group of families who are compassionate with children in this journey and compassionate with each other in this process of growing, and who know what to do, know the truths at least that we want to have taught. So thank you so much.
Our dear Father in heaven, how grateful we are to be here tonight together as children of Thee. We're grateful for the gift of our bodies and grateful for the gift of sexuality. We're thankful for the spirit of this evening, for the beautiful truths that have been shared in such an uplifting way, and for the helpful information and the perspectives. Father, we pray that Thou wilt bless our families and each one of us as we seek to understand ourselves, our sexuality, and open up to experiencing it as the gift that it is meant to be. And as we seek to teach our children, we pray that we will be blessed with wisdom and sensitivity and understanding of each individual. And we're grateful for the hope of the atonement and pray for Thy guidance as we live and as we teach in our families and as we interact with the world around us and respond to the things that we experience and help our children to do the same. We pray thy blessings will go with us and thank thee for such wonderful resources around us and for truth and revelation and prayer. And these things we pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.